Picture the scene. The low deck of a warship, thick with the acrid smoke of gunpowder. A man, his apron already stained a sickening crimson, takes a long swig from a bottle of rum. He turns, wild-eyed, to the screaming sailor strapped to a table. There's a crude saw in his other hand. This is the image we all know. The ship's surgeon as a drunken, brutish hack, a butcher barely more skilled than the man who carves the salt pork. This is the sawbones of legend, but it is a comfortable lie, a caricature we've created to shield ourselves from a reality that was infinitely more sober and far more terrifying. Now, erase that image. Replace it with you. You are a warranted officer, a man of science and study in a world of brute force. You might take a drink, but never before your work begins. Because you are not a butcher, you are a carpenter of men. This vessel of oak and pine you call home is a machine for war, and like any machine, its components break. The shipwright mends a shattered mast, you mend a shattered limb. The sailmaker stitches a torn canvas, you stitch torn flex. The materials are different, the stakes impossibly higher, but the mindset is the same. A cold, pragmatic assessment of damage, and the precise application of tools to a problem. Your workshop is the entire ship, a floating wooden world groaning around you, perpetually damp, never truly still. You know its sounds intimately, the shriek of the rigging in a gale, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the constant oppressive creak of the timbers, like the moans of a sleeping giant. These are the sounds of peace. But you are always listening for another sound, the sharp, percussive roar of a French broadside, because that is when your true work begins. And your most important tool is not a bottle for courage, but this. Feel the weight of it in your hand, your capital amputation saw. The handle, carved from dark hardwood, is worn smooth by your own anxious grip. Its long steel blade is meticulously, almost lovingly sharpened and maintained by you and you alone. It is a beautiful, terrible instrument. It represents the absolute limit of your craft, the final, desperate argument you can make against death. In an age before we truly understood infection, before the comfort of anesthesia, this tool was not an instrument of chaos. It was an instrument of brutal, calculated mercy. To wield it, you had to silence your own humanity. You had to learn to see the men on your bloody table, men you shared jokes with just hours before, not as husbands and sons, but as structures of timber and bone that needed mending or cutting away to save the rest of the whole. Welcome back to Epoch Immersion. We're here to explore lives lived at the very edge of history, roles defined by extreme pressure and profound change, and few lives were lived closer to that edge than the one we are dissecting today. We are stepping into the blood-stained, sea-soaked boots of a Royal Navy ship's surgeon to discover what it was really like during the height of the Napoleonic Wars. This was the era of Nelson and Trafalgar, an age when the fate of nations was decided by the brute force of wooden walls and coordinated broadsides of iron. Upon these floating fortresses, tens of thousands of men lived, fought, and died for years on end, often without setting foot on dry land. For every single one of them, from the revered captain down to the youngest powder monkey, you were the sole arbiter of their physical fate. You were the only man aboard with the knowledge, limited and flawed as it was, to defy death. To truly understand your world, we must continue to look through your eyes, adopting the necessary psychological armor of our narrative lens, the carpenter of men. This wasn't just a grim nickname, it was a survival strategy, a way to transform the unbearable chaos of human suffering into a series of technical problems to be solved, a way to rationalize the brutal arithmetic of saving lives amidst overwhelming trauma. So what would possibly draw an educated man to this life of violent contrasts? What status, what purpose, what dark allure awaited you on the deck of a man of war? We will begin by exploring the surprising privileges of the post. So what siren song could justify a life spent amidst the stench of disease and the thunder of cannon fire? The answer wasn't a single motive, but a powerful trinity of ambition that resonated deeply with the Georgian mind: status, science, and gold. First, in that rigidly class-defined world, you were a gentleman. Your warrant from the Admiralty made you a warrant officer, a rank that elevated you far above the common sailor. This wasn't just a title, it was your passport to the wardroom, where you lived and dined with the ship's lieutenants. You were addressed as Mr. Surgeon, a man of authority and respect within the wooden world of a king's ship. This professional standing was a significant prize in itself. Beyond status, you had scientific purpose. As the sole medical authority for hundreds of men, your sick bay was a laboratory at the frontier of knowledge. You walked in the tradition of naval surgeons like James Lind, whose shipboard experiments had conquered the scourge of scurvy. Every diagnosis was a puzzle, every successful treatment a victory for methodical observation over blind chance. This autonomy was a powerful draw for an inquisitive mind. Finally, there was the intoxicating gamble for wealth. Your pay was respectable, but the true prize was, quite literally, prize money. When your ship captured an enemy vessel, its value was sold and distributed amongst the crew. As a senior warrant officer, your share could be immense. A single rich capture could make you a wealthy man overnight. It was the ultimate high-stakes lottery, turning every strange sail on the horizon into a potential fortune. But for every guinea of prize money, a price was paid. It was paid in blood, in quiet suffering, and in a profound loneliness known only to those who must inflict pain in order to save a life. The reality of your role was a waking nightmare, defined by the slaughterhouse of battle and the silent terror of disease. When the drums beat to quarters, your world shrank to the cockpit, a cramped space near the waterline chosen because it was below the enemy's guns. Lit by swinging lanterns that threw monstrous dancing shadows, this became your operating theater. The air grew thick with the coppery sweet stench of blood, mingling with tar and gunpowder. The screams of men, held down by their messmates, echoed off the low beams as your saw did its work. There was no anesthesia, only a leather gag to bite on and a swig of rum. Your only mercy was speed. In these moments, your humanity was a liability. You had to become the carpenter of men, seeing only the shattered timber of a limb, not the terrified boy it belonged to. Yet the horror of battle was acute and sporadic. Your true, relentless enemy was disease. French cannons were a known threat, but the invisible killers lurking within the ship's hull were far more deadly. Scurvy, the spotty fiend, rotted men from the inside out. Typhus, the dreaded jail fever, could burn through the crowded mess decks like fire. Dysentery, the bloody flux, left men helpless and wasted. You fought this invisible horde with remedies that were little more than desperate guesswork, waging a constant, often losing war against an enemy you could neither see nor understand. This was the ultimate cruelty of your post, to be a man of science haunted by his own vast ignorance, utterly alone with the finality of your decisions. But life at sea was not a constant storm of steel and agony. The days of terror were punctuated by weeks, sometimes months, of monotonous routine. In this quiet, grinding reality, your role shifted from emergency craftsman to the ship's sole guardian of health, in matters both great and small. Your day began with morning rounds in the sick bay. This was no clean hospital ward, but a cramped, poorly ventilated space on a lower deck, thick with the smell of stale air, bilge water, and sickness. Here you would move from hammock to hammock, your practiced eye searching for the early signs of trouble, the unnaturally bright eyes of a fever, the spongy, bleeding gums that heralded scurvy, or the dreaded rash of typhus. Most of your work was far from dramatic. You were the ship's dentist, armed with a terrifying turnkey to extract rotten molars. You were the dermatologist lancing boils and treating the friction burns caused by rough ropes. You set the frequent fractures that came from men falling from the rigging in rough weather. Your pharmacy was small. You dispensed laudanum for pain, harsh purgatives to cleanse the system, and toxic mercury compounds for the venereal diseases rampant in every port. After your rounds, you would retreat to your cabin to update your meticulous medical journal. Every case, every symptom, every treatment administered was recorded with scientific detachment. This logbook was your primary research tool and your legal defense against any charge of neglect. You were also a public health officer, constantly nagging the captain and lieutenants about airing out the damp lower decks with wind sails and enforcing cleanliness to keep disease at bay. You were fighting a preventative war, one day at a time. Survival in your role depended on more than just textbook knowledge. It required a set of hard-won skills, brutal, efficient techniques that truly embodied the mindset of the carpenter of men. These were the tricks of your bloody trade. The most vital of these was the art of the lightning-fast amputation. In a world without anesthesia, speed was the only form of mercy. Your goal was to have the limb off in under a minute. The true key was the tourniquet, a simple band of canvas and a stick, twisted brutally tight high on the limb to staunch the flow of blood before the first cut. Then, a swift circular incision with the Catling knife through skin and muscle, the flesh pulled back to expose the bone, and finally, the quick, rasping work of your saw. This terrifying speed wasn't for show. It was a desperate race against surgical shock and blood loss, the true killers on your table. During battle, you were also a grim accountant of life, practicing the brutal calculus of triage. You quickly learned to ignore the loudest screams. Your priority was not the mortally wounded, but those who could be saved, and if possible, return to the fight. A man with a deep gash might be stitched up and sent back to his cannon, while a man with a gut wound was made comfortable with laudanum and left to God. It was a horrifying but necessary logic. One of the strangest tricks was a belief in what was called laudable pus. Surgeons of your era thought that thick, creamy pus from a wound was a good sign, the body expelling its bad humors. We now know this is a sign of a raging staph infection. Let me know in the comments which of these brutal historical realities you find the most surprising. So, what is our final verdict on the Royal Navy surgeon? He was no drunken butcher, nor was he a miracle worker. He was a pioneer, standing on the bloody, splintered precipice of modern medicine. The carpenter of men was not a monster, but a pragmatist, a man of science forced into a brutal craft by the profound ignorance of his age. His saw was not a symbol of cruelty, but a desperate tool used against a darkness he could barely comprehend. His legacy is not found in statues, but in the pulsating heart of every modern emergency room in 2025. The core principles of trauma care, the frantic urgency of the golden hour, the obsession with controlling hemorrhage, the calm efficiency in the face of chaos, these were all forged in the hell of the ship's cockpit. The paramedic skillfully applying a tourniquet at a roadside accident is the direct professional descendant of a surgeon desperately twisting a canvas band in the heat of battle. The brutal calculus of triage, which he practiced out of necessity, is now a cornerstone of all emergency and disaster response. His meticulous logbooks were the ancestors of the clinical trials that are the bedrock of medicine today. So the next time you see the serene, sterile, and silent environment of a modern operating theater, remember its ancestor, the dark, septic, and screaming cockpit. The incredible precision of a modern surgeon's tools exists only because of the hard-won lessons learned with a simple, terrifying steel saw. Our medical certainty was purchased with his profound doubt. Our knowledge of hygiene was bought with his countless unrecorded losses to infection. His work, in all of its horror and its quiet, desperate dignity, is the bloody and unbreakable foundation upon which the marvels of modern surgery were built. Thank you for joining us on Epoch Immersion. If this journey has given you a new perspective on the history of medicine, consider liking the video and subscribing for more deep dives into what it was really like. Until next time, stay curious.